Okay. So Brian, it's lovely to see you again. Long time since we spoke, and thank you very much for agreeing to help with this Agile Governance Guide development meeting. As I explained to you, the guide is very much aimed at the executive team, and in this particular Scrum session, we are looking very much at the Scrum product owners and how Holacracy will help them, or how it will differ from what they normally do, what effect it will have on the product owners, basically. It's quite an exciting challenge that we've got here, and I personally think that Holacracy will be of a great help.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love to dive in.
Yeah, excellent, good. Okay, well, I know that you have been sort of heavily featured in Frederick Laloux's book on reinventing organizations. And Holacracy is one of the technologies that he looks at quite carefully there. And in that book, which is research-based, he states that in complex societies, such as our very large organizations, a structure without a boss is superior in performance. So I was wondering if you can comment on the difference between a complex system run by bosses and a complex system with a distributed authority.
Yeah, I think we can actually just look at some of the world around us and our other human societies and see some of that difference. We've, I think, seen for quite a while the difference between a top-down directed economy and one that allows self-organization and more of an emergent economy. So, if you look at the bread lines in Russia in the Soviet era, what you see is the result of attempting to control from the top with almost an omniscient overview and information of the whole system. It's really hard to get that right. And the other interesting piece, there may have been bread lines and all that people know about, but the candy stores were overflowing with candy. There was plentiful candy, but not enough bread and milk.
Yeah.
It's really easy to get wrong the allocation of resources. It's just one example. On the other hand, when you look at, say, modern New York City, it's great data point there. On average, the amount of food required in Manhattan to keep people from starving is actually about 3 days worth of food. So at any point in time, there's only 3 days of food in that city. And yet it all gets where it needs to go, right? It gets to the people that need it, people eat. And I think that's pretty fascinating. And one of the things that enables that is, instead of having one intelligence at the top trying to direct and command everything, you end up with everyone using their local intelligence. You're tapping more wisdom from more people.
Yeah.
Right. You're allowing more people to use their judgment in their local environment because they know it best. Right. And figure out what their needs are and what should flow to them from them. There's a signaling system with prices, but it's much more than just that. There's an emergent order, and we see that in our cities all the time. Yes, we have governments organizing some services, but the vast majority of what happens in a city is not from a top-down directed boss. It's actually in a state of anarchy. It has rules, but no rulers. And I think what Holacracy brings into an organization is a lot of that same power. You have rules, but no rulers. And what that allows is everyone to use their local intelligence within a framework of rules. Just like in our cities, I know not to go steal my neighbor's car to meet my goals. There's boundaries and there's rules to abide by. But within that, I'm free to look at my local environment and adapt and use my knowledge, my wisdom, my experience. And I know what's mine to control and what isn't. And that's the framework of rules. When you bring that within an organization, you get an emergent order that looks a lot more like it does in our cities. It allows people to locally adapt. It's just a more efficient way. There's less waste. There's more creativity. There's more order that doesn't take planning, but that kind of surfaces from the boundaries and the interconnections of people. That's one just kind of way of looking at it overall.
Yes. And within our large organizations, we tend to have everything directed through a hierarchy.
Yeah, it's pretty cool when there isn't that boss that can tell you what to do, But instead, there's lots of different roles, and we all have things we control, and we all have things that we're dependent on others for, just like in life, right?
Yeah.
I don't, at least once you leave home, you don't get that parental boss anymore to direct your life. You have to lead your own life. And yet,
Hopefully.
hopefully, yeah. And yet we all have a role to fill, and we all have some power around that role. And it's a very different way of showing up in an organization, and yet it allows a lot more autonomy, it allows a lot more freedom, a lot more creativity, and hopefully it allows us to do better work.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Yes, good. Can you also explain then the relationship between Agile and Holacracy? Because both, for instance, have self-organizing teams. So what is the difference about Holacracy?
Yeah, so just for historical context, Holacracy was developed in its early days in an Agile software development firm. So it kind of grew out of Agile in its fundamental birthing. And actually it grew out of the search for, we did Agile in our software teams, but well, what do we do in the rest of the company? How do we broaden this and bring the same principles that we were experiencing from Agile to all aspects of our business, including to our Agile process itself? Because you look at something like Scrum, and it's a brilliant method, and every organization is a little bit different, and sometimes there's a need to adapt something to that context. What happens when you want your product owner to do something a little bit different because you happen to be in business X and have some special need? Or you want your developers to focus on something that Scrum doesn't provide because it's unique to your situation. So the irony of most implementations of Scrum or any Agile method is that they themselves are not very agile, right? That there's no easy systemized way to change the way we do Agile software development. So there's kind of a meta layer there that isn't provided by an Agile method, and that's what Holacracy does. It's not telling you how to run your software team. That's not its job. It's rather telling you how to figure out how to run your software team and how to evolve that to adapt to your local context. So another metaphor you can use, Holacracy is kind of like an operating system, and Scrum is more like an app. So Holacracy gives you a platform that says, here's how you make decisions about how to run things. Here's how you distribute authority and decide who makes which decisions. Here's how you distribute expectations and say, what should the product manager do? And then Scrum gives you a nice app to run on top of that operating system. You can use a Scrum Master role and a product owner role. Let's have a customer role. Let's have all of these aspects, right, built on top of this core platform.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So one of the challenges then with Holacracy seems to come from the executive team, who are used to making all those decisions themselves, and especially the CEO. It strikes me that their role somewhat changes in an organisation that is run with Holacracy. So how does that actually change? And sort of similarly, you just mentioned the Scrum the product owner, who normally would make all the business decisions in the Scrum team, and is effectively the final arbiter of all of the requirements. How is Holacracy similar and dissimilar, and how does it affect the product owner as well? So yeah, 2 questions there.
Yeah, definitely. So on the first one, it does change the role of managers of any sorts, whether they're executive, middle management, whatever, CEO. And this shift's both, I think, really challenging and really liberating when it can happen. It actually forces them to go back to being workers. And what I mean by that is finding some value they can contribute creatively, getting something done. Another way of saying it, it helps them be entrepreneurs, not professional managers.
Right.
Right. And it's putting them in the role now where the system bakes in a lot of the coordination function of management. A lot of the distribution, breaking down the work kind of happens within the system emergently over time. It evolves. So their function is no longer a professional manager, which means if they want to add value, and I think many of them do, the need is to actually go back to being an entrepreneur and building something, to figure out what's missing in this team that I can uniquely add, or what's not being currently handled, what's falling through the cracks, and then how do I pick up that ball and run with it and systemize it and build a company. So it shifts them from managers to organization builders. And it actually invites everybody to get involved in that work as well, of organization building. The former managers have an interesting thing in that a lot of what they did do is now obsolete, but it's not that different than what happens when you adopt Agile or Scrum, and your former project managers have to let go of a lot of what they did before because it's just revealed as in this system no longer highly valuable work, but instead they get the opportunity to do something new that's even more valuable. Right? A new kind of leadership is possible. I think the same is true with Holacracy. Now we get to be entrepreneurs as former managers. And on the product owner side, it may change it, it may not. It really depends on the specific team. Holacracy doesn't tell you how to organize an agile software team or any team. It just gives you the meta framework for you together to figure out how to do that and to let it evolve as your environment teaches you things. So, we found we have a software team in my company, and we use at the beginning a pretty canned agile approach, and now we've adapted it because we find in our context, there are certain decisions we don't want the product manager to make. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't go with their role. We want the freedom to assign somebody else who's better at that to it. So we carve out some decisions and we put it into another role that can be assigned to anyone. There's some things that the product manager does decide, they stay with that role. There's no prescription for that, but what we have now is a system to actually adapt. So when we discover, like, for example, we don't want our product manager to prioritize the order in which bugs get implemented. We have a customer engagement role that's actually really close to our clients, and that role is actually a better fit. They're getting the feedback about what bugs are getting in the way. We want that role to prioritize bugs. Then we can adapt our process and allow that to happen. For us, that made sense. For another environment, that might be a terrible idea. Holacracy doesn't tell you, again, what to do. It just gives you the framework for allowing that evolution to happen, for trying different things, for learning from the results, and for adapting your structure.
So large projects and also small agile projects can both run under Holacracy very easily.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the way I say it. Sometimes people ask me, can we adopt part of Holacracy? It's a big thing to bite off, and the answer is no. You cannot adopt part of Holacracy, but you can adopt all of Holacracy and part of the company. And the way I say it, it's like, if you just adopted one little rule from Scrum and left the others behind, you don't get Scrum. At best, you get a micro improvement, but at worst, you actually do harm because Scrum is a whole system that all kind of fits together, and there are things you can adapt, there are things you really shouldn't. Holacracy is kind of the same. It's a whole system, so you can't adopt part of it and expect to get much benefit. But what you can do is adopt all of it in this department or in this team or in this division or what have you. And that's the way a lot of large companies start. Our largest case over here in the US is a pretty famous company for us called Zappos, and they didn't start in 1,500 employees, which is their size. They started in a 100-person department, and they adopted all of Holacracy in that department for about 6 months and used that as a pilot to get ready for it, to understand it, to make sure it was right for them. Then they pulled the trigger on spreading it to the 1,500. And that works fine.
Yeah, so it's basically piloting and phasing it in, which is actually what we're currently doing in the Russian company that I'm working with Deirdre in at the moment. And we are starting with a small 100-man team, and then hopefully we will be able to spread it out to the larger organisation later on. What challenges are there in doing that, in spreading it into the larger organization?
Yeah, actually, the biggest challenge I found, we've had a couple of cases where the pilot phase was canceled and the spread to everyone else accelerated because the pilot team can get really frustrated when they suddenly have a much more effective way of what we call processing tensions. In other words, taking the things that are bugging them or that could be better, the opportunities, and doing something with them. When that's confined to just their team, they start sensing all of these things that are limiting their team that are in the broader company.
Yeah.
And that frustration often leads that team to say, we want these other guys to be using the system so that we can actually get them to improve what we need from them.
Right.
So it can actually be challenging both because of that frustration, but also to navigate across that boundary.
Yes.
And it's not that dissimilar. I ran an agile software consulting company, and our customers, our clients, booking us to build their software often didn't know Agile to begin with, and that was an interesting challenge to navigate when they were expecting a top-down waterfall approach to development.
Yeah.
And here we are doing Agile. We'd have to educate them, we'd have to navigate that boundary, and that's a real pain. Much easier is to bring them into the Agile fold and have them kind of live the method with us.
Yes.
The same is true with Holacracy. There's a pain in navigating from the way conventional businesses run to the part that's running in Holacracy. It's possible, but it's going to create some pain and tension in the whole system. Which is a healthy pain. It's the pain of, wanting things to move forward and to spread it.
Yeah.
But that's not to say it's easy. It will take several months for a team, even with the right help and coaching, to get to a point where it's working well enough that they even want to spread it beyond their walls. It's a tough challenge.
Indeed, indeed. Well, we're about out of time, actually, Brian, but that's been extremely useful and extremely helpful to, I'm sure, to all of us as we now start to discuss where we go next with this Agile Governance Guide. So thank you very much. I would like to thank you.
Thank you. Happy to help and good luck.
Great. Thank you.